Good morning, everyone. Today we're having a petting zoo at the synagogue for the children in the Hebrew school in honor of Parshat Noach, which was read yesterday, how Noach saved all the animals, all the species, kosher and non-kosher. But while Noach's generation was completely flooded and destroyed, in this week's Torah portion we also have a story of destruction, and that's the wicked cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. But unlike Noach, who did not pray on behalf of his generation to try to influence God to spare the nation, his generation, Abraham prays fervently for the wicked people of Sodom and Gomorrah. And he says to God, if there are 50 righteous people in the city, maybe you could spare the cities, because these 50 righteous people could transform the city and influence the community to change their wicked ways. And God says, fine, but he can't find 50. So he says, what about 45? What about 40? What about 30? He continues to negotiate with God until he says 20. And then he says, God, what's if I can't find 20, but what's if I can find 10 righteous people? Will you spare the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah? And God says, yes, if you could find 10 righteous people, I will spare the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. But when Abraham cannot even find 10 righteous people, he then relents and acquiesces to God's plan to destroy the wicked cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. However, the question is, in all of Sodom and Gomorrah there weren't 10 righteous people? And so the Rabbi says, look at the words in the verse. It says, if there are 10 righteous people, betoch ha'ir, in the midst of the city. And he says they weren't looking for ordinary people, looking for people who were leaders, who were in the midst of the city, who were influential. If there were 10 leaders in the entire cities of Sodom and Gomorrah that would take a stand to direct others and inspire others to change their wicked ways, then there would be hope for those cities. When he couldn't even find 10 people in the midst of the city that would stand up for righteousness and justice, that's when God decided that there's no hope for this city. There's no hope for this community. And therefore they had to be destroyed. And when you read the Torah portion, whether last week's Torah portion about the violence that existed in the time of Noach, which is called Hamas. Violence, the word in the Torah is Hamas. And you read this week's Torah portion, Abraham praying for Sodom and Gomorrah. You have to think about the times we're in. And we say, God, we don't want to destroy innocent lives. Like Abraham, we're the children of Abraham. We want to spare humanity. But if we can't find even 10 righteous people, 10 leaders in Gaza that will stand up and say to the Palestinian people, this is evil, this is wrong, this is not what we should be doing, murdering and burning alive babies and grandmothers, then is there any hope for this city? And like Sodom and Gomorrah, the wickedness, the cruelty, the barbarism which was taking place at that time in Sodom and Gomorrah, God says there's no hope for this city, there's no future for them. There's so many incredible stories coming out of Israel of courage and self-sacrifice. We're seeing the beauty, the greatness, the strength, the faith, the resilience, the hope of the Jewish nation. And we witnessed in 1 week, in 2 weeks, first a pogrom, a mini Holocaust, then a blood libel accusing Israel of killing innocent people in a hospital, which was now shown to be a blood libel. But we're also seeing what our ancestors have done for thousands of years, which is stand strong and hold on to their faith in God and their love for one another to overcome every enemy. And one story which really illustrates this was one of the greatest tragedies was an entire family was wiped out, the Zohar family. Yaniv and his wife Yasmin and their 2 daughters Keshet and Techelet were murdered by the terrorists, by these barbaric, inhumane terrorists. But the 12-year-old son, Ariel, had gotten up that morning and decided to go for a jog. And he was out of the house when the terrorists came. And he survived. And last week you saw the images of this 12-year-old beautiful boy sitting as 4 of his family members, mother, father, and 2 sisters, were lowered into the ground. And at his 2 sides was sitting his grandparents, his father's father and mother, and his grandfather's a Holocaust survivor, and he's 90 years old, and they were holding him, loving him, as he sat on a chair watching his whole family be buried. When they were sitting Shiva, a member of Zaka, which is the organization that helps retrieve all the remains for proper Jewish burial, came to the house to pay a shiva to this boy Ariel. And when he was talking to him, Ariel said, I'd like to ask you a favor. And the Zaka member, whose name was Chaim Yotzman, said, anything, what could I do? He says, my bar mitzvah is next week. This little boy's bar mitzvah is next week. And he says, my father brought me a beautiful new pair of tefillin, but I would like to wear my father's tefillin at my bar mitzvah. Can you go back to my house and retrieve my father's tefillin? And Chaim Yotzman said, it's really now a crime scene. It's all cordoned off. There are rockets falling, but I will try my best. And he went to the IDF and he said, this boy wants his father's tefillin. Could I retrieve it? And the IDF said, we're going to allow you to go back in to look for the tefillin. And he went into the house, and sure enough, he found the father's tefillin. He brought it back to the Shiva house. And you see Ariel hugging this member of Zaka and thanking him as he takes his father's tefillin in his hand. And the grandfather thanks him. And then Chaim Yotzman says that the grandfather said to his grandson Ariel, I want you to know that I was 14 years old when the Nazis murdered my mother and father. But here I am today living in the land of Israel, 90 years old, and I am a father of many children and a grandfather of many grandchildren. He said, these barbarians, Hamas, Nazis, murdered your father and mother at the age of 12. But I promise you, one day, you will live a long life, and you will be a father and a grandfather, and you will have descendants here in the land of Israel. And the Zaka members said, I've buried hundreds of people. I've been involved in retrieving hundreds of bodies. And I cried many times over the past 2 weeks, but I started crying like I never cried before, because I realized that the Jewish people have hope and faith. And when the grandfather says, you will live to see beautiful descendants here in the land of Israel, I knew that Am Yisrael Chai, the Jewish people, will live on. When I see a 12-year-old boy who the only thing he wants from his home is his father's tefillin to wear at his bar mitzvah, I knew there's hope and there's faith, and then we will survive. And at that point, the grandfather, who was 90 years old, asked the Zaka member, Chaim Yotzman, to stand up. And he stood up, and the Holocaust survivor grandfather saluted the Zaka volunteer. This is the story of the Jewish people that we're seeing played out. The darkest darkness and the greatest light coming out to combat this evil. Am Yisrael Chai. Have a wonderful day.